In the Fallout franchise, 76 is arguably the most infamous due to its launch and the real-life consequences that followed. I'm pretty sure every Fallout fan has seen this video. However, that's not even covering the game's in-universe story, and as someone who's played it for 2 videos, a cue not-so-subtle hint to watch them, I know that it can feel non-existent sometimes, but it is there. The problem, of course, was the execution. To give a broad summary of the original story, shortly after the bombs drop, the survivors in Appalachia try to rebuild civilization, resulting in the formation of the various factions throughout the region. At first, some of the factions did cooperate, but as time goes on, each faction makes several key fuck-ups which lead to the creation of the Scorched Plague, and each faction getting wiped out one by one. First, the Enclave, who basically make the plague, refuse to elaborate and die, courtesy of a civil war and their AI modus. Next is the Brotherhood of Steel, who decide that communication skills are cringe and die fighting the plague. Then the Responders, who are in denial of the threat until it's too late. And then the Free States, who just wanted to stay indoors until they died. Finally, after all that, Vault 76 opens, and the Dwellers now have to clean up the mess that was left behind. Do you see the problem here? All the major events of the story happen before the players even arrive. So what would happen if we change that? Now I want to get one thing straight. I think the story of the flaws of each faction dooming themselves and everyone else is underrated. However, making all the factions already dead by default is just a waste. If you're into that, then I hear Fallout Dust actually makes this setup work. In the case of Fallout 76, I think it would be better if the Vault Dwellers were added into the mix right before all the factions got wiped out. Maybe changing Reclamation Day to be earlier than in canon, or all the factions somehow surviving long enough for the canon Reclamation Day, with total extinction still being a possible bad ending. Of course, there would have to be other changes to the story to allow the factions to survive. Maybe the Free States built bunkers for the Responders and Brotherhood back when they were still on better terms. Or some of the existing Free States bunkers got taken over by the other two either as part of some kind of agreement or by force. So at least a few of them could have hid inside those to survive. For the Enclave, maybe the rebellion succeeded in taking out the, well, more evil Enclave members and were partially successful in hacking Modus so the AI doesn't kill everyone at the White Springs bunker. But at the cost of crippling most of their assets, forcing them to stay hidden during the initial outbreak. However it happens, the state of the main factions when we meet them would be similar to that of the smaller factions in Fallout New Vegas. For example, the Appalachian Brotherhood being in lockdown in Fort Defiance, or some other fallback point, like the Mojave Brotherhood in Hidden Valley, showing just how bad the situation has gotten in Appalachia, with the Scorched Plague beating and whittling them all down to stragglers, desperate to survive and bitter at each other's failings while refusing to acknowledge their own. It's up to us, the Vault Dwellers with no in-universe bias, to rebuild and unite the factions to stop the Scorched Plague. As for how the factions play into the campaign, they should each provide a specialty because of their differences. On the defensive side, the Responders can focus more on medical care, gaining trust and connecting with the people of Appalachia, while the Free States provide fortifications, making sure everyone has supplies and a roof over their head. On the offensive side are obviously the Brotherhood and the Enclave. Now I know some people will claim that the Brotherhood is just a cheaper version of the Enclave, and I think this can be avoided by taking a page out of Fallout 4, giving each their own unique tactics and thus playstyles. The Brotherhood already shares similarities with the Imperium of Man, so let's run with that. Their tactics can be more open, direct, and brutal with large-scale prolonged engagements, basically turning the entire battlefield into a Michael Bay scene. Aside from doing damage, the display will also serve the purpose of morale. And while you can't demoralize a plague, you can inspire people by showing them that fighting back is possible. On the other hand, the Enclave's tactics can be more akin to the Spartans of Halo, emphasizing stealth and the deployment of small teams to hit the Scorch where it's least expected and where it hurts the most. Their more advanced and thus rare equipment can also emphasize efficiency. Since this is a game, resources will not be literally finite, but the Enclave could just resupply you slower than the other factions. We can even have the option of being more favorable towards certain factions, and shape them to be better according to our own personal beliefs. And even letting the ones we don't like die at the cost of making the war against the Scorched more difficult for us. For example, if the Responders die, then the inoculation project would have to be taken up by the other factions, further straining them and resulting in an inferior version of the vaccine. This concept would also play into the motivations of each faction, especially for the Enclave, since I think it would make sense for them to want to stay out of the public eye, not only to harken back to the other games, but also because they were responsible for creating the Scorched Plague. And even though the members encountered would have been the ones that rebelled because of the plague's creation, they still took part in unleashing the previous threats that the other factions faced in the past. So you would need to work especially hard to get the other factions to accept them, where your options are: 1. Just expose the truth entirely, which would lead to the other factions turning on the Enclave and exterminating them. 2. Tell the other factions but somehow convince them to keep this secret from the general public. Or 3, if you want a more evil playthrough, you can even cover up their crimes entirely. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time America swept something under the rug. Kinda like how Oni covered up the Spartan projects in Halo. As the story progresses, the surviving factions could even gain upgrades to their equipment as they rebuild. Some of these upgrades could even be in response to other factions dying. For example, if the Enclave dies, then the Brotherhood would have to develop equipment geared towards stealth. And if both are dead, then the Responders will have to step up as a military, modifying the Excavator power armor for combat. I mean, just look at all these skins. It's a crime that they're just cosmetics, not to mention that they're only accessible through the seasonal grind or the atomic shop. Plus, making these items dependent on choices means each player won't have the same gear, which is something that the games already do, I just tweaked it a bit for 76. This would also somewhat mitigate the issue of 76 having too much stuff. The in-game world could even change depending on our choices, kinda like the Helldivers 2 war map. Of course, we'd have to compensate for the multiplayer aspect, so progress is isolated for each player. Particularly when it comes to entire factions dying off, so each player can make their own choices without interfering with another's. It could be just as simple as the good old isolating key areas that are affected by player choices, so when different players enter them, they see different environments. Or maybe this could affect access to events based on which factions are still alive for each player. So if you were to let the Brotherhood die, then you'd get locked out of their events. I think this would add a lot of weight to players' decisions. And if being locked out of events sounds extreme, then I think a good workaround would be teams. Basically, if the Brotherhood is dead in your story, but you have a teammate who has the Brotherhood alive in their story, then you'd be allowed into those events. This would give players even more reason to join teams, and hammer home the theme of working together. We can keep the existing events, but they would need an overhaul, mainly the inclusion of more NPCs. For example, Line in the Sand could include living Brotherhood soldiers instead of just corpses, and the number of soldiers and the quality of their equipment increases or decreases to compensate for how many players join the event. That way, even if you're the only player who shows up, then you still have a fighting chance. Oh, and don't worry about this making events too easy, because at the end of the day, they're still NPCs. We could even add new events specifically related to the war against the Scorched Plague. You could defend new places like the settlements or military checkpoints in Fallout 4, attack an infestation of Scorched, help transport supplies, or vaccinate people, etc. The war would ultimately culminate in the Scorched Earth event, leaving the surviving factions to build a new future according to how you shape them. So yeah, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed. If you didn't, well, this is no better than fanfiction anyway, so my words are meaningless. I got the idea for this from my own experiences with the campaign, but I was also particularly inspired by this video by Juicehead, as well as the What Would It Look Like videos by Omega Initiative, so go check them out. If you have any suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments, it's fun to see other people's ideas. Anyway, it's currently Canada Day while I'm recording this, so happy belated Canada Day while Canada still exists, and I'll see you guys next time when the bombs drop.